Well, the well I'm on is just about to finish. They finished drilling a day or two ago, and that usually means the last couple days I basically lay on the couch and read or YouTube videos. And my partner left, which means I get all of his pay as well as mine, so it's kind of a nice little bonus to spend the last couple days making twice as much as you normally would. But I was looking online and I saw political cartoon. I didn't really read it, but the caption on it was political corruption. And I really don't like this term, and I don't like what it implies, because what it implies is that there's political corruption is bad, and the implication then is that there's such a thing as politics that is not corrupt. Now, I understand that there are probably politicians and government bureaucrats who more or less view themselves as providing some kind of public good, that they're actually doing some kind of service, and that they don't participate necessarily in the most overt types of graft and corruption we normally talk about, taking bribes or turning the other way, or favoritism towards their friends or whatever. Although I'm sure that's really common. I have no way of saying how common, but that's not the kind of corruption I'm talking about. I'm referring to the fact that any state that exists cannot perform the pacific, if that's a word, functions that the people who advocate their existence typically ascribe to them. Pretty much always ascribe to them, rather. So, people say, well, there's, the market is fine and all, unless they're socialists and they don't say that, but there are market failures, and you need the government to fill those gaps, to perform a function that can't be performed by any other means except through the establishment of a state and all that goes with that. And the problem is that the states can never deliver on these promises, that they have the ideological power and exceptionalism that they are predicated upon basically makes them worse than any of the problems they're supposed to solve. And they also, because they're based on taxation, can't solve them. There's two main reasons, I think. The main one, and I think the one that the vast majority of people are pretty familiar with, is the incentive powers implied in having the incentives implied in having that kind of power. So you say, well, markets. Say you don't like the free rider problem. You think that it's not fair, that some people might benefit without paying, and this might mean that the goods and services won't be provided, which of course I think is silly, because let's just assume that food was a free rider problem, then everyone would starve because they would be so unwilling to accidentally feed somebody else. This doesn't make sense. Or defense is the one they always use. Oh, I'd rather be attacked and slaughtered by pirates than pay for something that might benefit someone else. No, you might begrudge it and might incentivize you to pay less or something, or try and find a way to exclude those who don't pay, which I don't think is such a huge problem. Anyway, point is, so they say, well, we need the government to step in and give them coercive power and a monopoly on force, or whatever you want to call it, however you want to define it, and then they can solve that problem. And of course, as soon as you do that, then the incentive is they have no incentive to actually provide the good or service that you allegedly thought that they were needed for. Now that they have the power of coercion, they can do whatever they want. They can get taxes from you, they can have power over you, they can expropriate basically whatever they want, and they don't have to give you anything. They don't have to give you environmental controls, they don't have to give you defense, they don't have to respect private property, they don't have to protect patents, they don't have to do anything. So there's an incentive problem, and they have the incentive to become as tyrannical as they possibly can without incurring the wrath of the population. That's the number one problem, and I think that's the one most people are aware of. The other one is a more economic problem, and that is, even if they were angelic, even if they wanted to help and they weren't going to abuse the power they have, which is a totally unreasonable assumption, but let's assume that they did. Since they're not in the market, since they're reliant on taxes and not voluntary transactions, they have no way to even really know how to provide what is best. And I've heard some people say, well, some things are just negative externalities, and so the government can ban them. So, like, say without getting into debate whether it's true or not, let's just say that CO2 was a pollution and that it's hurting the planet. And the market failurists would say, well, then we can have the government can come and it can just ban CO2. But the problem there is it's not that simple. How much CO2 can be? Because people exhale CO2. Different factories, farms, and stuff produce different amounts, and the state has no way of knowing how much is too much, who should be, who should not be. They have no just, fair, or anything other than completely arbitrary means of enforcing that. And so the person who just the state that people talk about when they say we need a state, you know, the people who say they're market failures or that only the state can do this or only the state can do that, they're not talking about a theoretical state, because theoretically no state can really do those things. They're talking about a hypothetical state. They're talking about an imaginary state. They're talking about a state that there's no scientific or historical basis for assuming is even possible, and they're saying we should have this imaginary thing. We should abolish the market, at least to some extent, and we should create what is potentially the most destructive institution in human society, which at the very least that's potentially the case. I mean, this is a fact that I shouldn't have to elaborate here. But states kill an awful lot of people, and if you want to make the argument that, well, it's better than the alternative, then that better be a really, really good argument. And to have it be on an imaginary state, a state that, I mean, unless you can eliminate those two problems and say, well, in my state there won't be any incentive for power or to abrogate more power or to take advantage. There's some kind of system of checks and balances you can put in that makes that impossible or so unlikely as to be negligible, then you don't have a very good case to risk that, you know, like. And then the other one is, do you have a way to have it respond to market conditions, to respond to consumer demands rather than its own ideas of what those demands might be? Or what is more often the case, and this is combining the two problems, just responding to whatever it wants most, which is what the state always does. That's what the U.S. government, if you look at the legislation they pass, they can give it names like Help the Children Act, and then it's like empower federal employees to do whatever they want, and take this much more money and spend this much more money, regulate this much. It's only by the most naive standards would it not be evidently self-serving what they do, at least the vast majority of the time. And so until people can overcome those two problems, and I don't see anyone who's even close to even trying. I mean, the people who advocate the states usually don't even attempt to do this. They just imagine a state, an angelic, altruistic state that somehow can impute the will of consumers without a market process. And then they say, well, I advocate the state and I'm against the market because of this imaginary phantom that I can't even explain how it could exist. But I'm just going to assume that it can because I imagine it. I guess another part of the reason I'm thinking of this is the genesis of Harry Browne, who I've been listening to recently. He ran for Libertarian president twice. So maybe it's a little weird, but he died in 2006. But he had a radio show for a year or two, and he said, you know, people say, oh, people imagine that the state's going to be like, it's going to embody whatever it is they want, and it never will. It's like they think, okay, I imagine a state that's going to subsidize green energy and eliminate roads, and it's going to be really nice to pets, and at the same time provide exactly this much education and this much diet. It's never going to do that. Like, and so why you would advocate that when you know that's not what you're going to get? I mean, to at least have some realistic assumption of what you'll actually end up. This is, I mean, even though I disagree with minarchists, you know, I at least understand, recognize at least the more principled ones at least realize that, okay, yeah, the state's basically this destructive entity. They think we need it, but they realize it's like an explosion, and they're just trying to, okay, maybe there's a way we can have the explosion scare the bandits away, but, you know, we know it's dangerous and destructive and we can't really control it, but, you know, we recognize that at least. But most people, and this is including like some libertarians, think don't think of it like that. They think of it as, I imagine the state doing these things, and even though the incentives don't give you any reason to assume that that could ever happen, they still advocate it. And it's just, I mean, I don't believe in market failure. I don't think there are problems with the free riders and pollution. I don't think that those are insoluble at all on a market. But even if I did, even if I was to grant them, these imaginary states, I don't see them as solutions. You know, if someone just said, we're going to have the Star Trek Federation, they're going to take care of it. I mean, when we laugh at that and be like, that's silly, you can't have that. You have no way to make that come true. You're just imagining that. And yet, whenever they just say, well, we're going to have democracy do it, or a representative republic, or a constitutional republic, or a monarchy, or whatever, it's the same thing. Because the organizations they're talking about still have the same mixed up backwards incentives, and they still don't have the knowledge to satisfy consumer wants. So it's just not a solution. I mean, it can be a nice thought experiment or something, but it's not. I mean, people say, "Oh, look, we have the state now," but it's clear the state is the root of many, not all, but many, if not most, of our social problems, and it always has been. And I don't know. I don't think that's very controversial of a statement. I mean, the state goes to great lengths to pretend that it's not. You know that, but I mean, it controls the education of the young, and not directly, but at least indirectly, the entire media, or most of it anyway. And so, I mean, the fact that most people believe otherwise, it's just a sign of conservative bias. That's something that is always going on. It's not I don't think it's something that's even unique to states, for that matter. But yeah, political corruption is just, there's no such thing as an incorrupt political structure. It doesn't exist. It can't exist, even theoretically. And for that reason, I think it's a little out of place to frame it, you know, like, oh, the honest politician, okay, as opposed to, or the hardworking public servant, when they're not servants. If they were servants, you could fire them, or you could tell them what to do. Obviously, it's the other way around. So, all right, that's it.